Shabbat Shalom and welcome once again to our Kabbalat Shabbat services. It's hard for me to believe that Purim is now over. We had a wonderful Megillah reading last night and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And thanks to everybody who sent out Mishloach Manot. I think this year was the largest number of Mishloach Manot baskets that was sent out. I think it was 94. So well done to Shaare Zedek. And thank you for those who sent my family and I Mishloach Manot. We're going to continue on page 309 with the Yedid Nefesh. Yedid Nefesh Avad Rachamon Meshoich Avadoch Eretz Anach Yorot Avadoch Kemo Hayan Yishtachaveh Mol Hadorah Vatik Yehemu Rachamecha Vechusna Halebeinu Habach Ki Ze Kamen Nichsav Nichasaf Li Rabbi Tiferet We turn to page 311 where we welcome the Shabbat with Psalm 95. Lechu neranena ladonai naria letzu yisheinu. Lechu neranena ladonai naria letzu yisheinu. Nekadem afanav betoda. Bismirot Nariyalo, Bismirot, Bismirot, Nariyalo. Kiel Gadol Melech Kalim Hashem, Yadom Ekres Zafazarim Lo, Hashem Lubon. Al Takshul Vav. Arba'im Shana, Kobedom Yamaram Toilevahim, V'Ehim Layadu Darachai, Hashem Ishpati Eviapi, Imehi Evavon, El Menuchati. Page 313, Psalm 96. Shir Adonai Shir Chadash, Shir Adonai Kol Haaretz, Shir Adonai Baruch Hu Shemo, Basru miyom leyom Yeshuato, Sapro v'goyim kevoho adoho v'chol ha'amim nifleotav ki gadol Adonai mahulal me'od no'arahu al kol Elohim ki kol Elohei ha'amim merilim v'Adonai shamayim asa ha'neve ha'dah lefahanav ha'ozev siferet b'migadasho havu l'Adonai mishpachot amim havu l'Adonai kavod v'yos havu l'Adonai kavod shemos u'mincha uvol lechatzrotav hishtachavu l'Adonai v'hadrat kodesh chilo mipanav kol haaretz Imru v'goyim Adonai malach Abdi kom tevei labahati mod Yadiramim b'meisharim yismachu hashamayim v'tagei la'aretz Yiram hayam Omeloho Ya'alo sadai V'chol asher bo Oz yiranenu kalat seyar lifnei Adonai kiva lishpot haaretz yishpotei vel betzedek v'yamim b'emunato. Bottom of page 313, Psalm 97. Adonai malach tagil haaretz Yeshu kol ovdei fesel hamithalalim v'alilim. Ha'omer Eloi sinora shomen nafshos chasidav miyad rishoim yatzilehem Ozaru l'tanik Oleyishri lehem v'simcha Simchu tzadikim b'Adonai v'holdu lezeche kadsho. Middle of page 315. Mizmor Shiru l'Adonai Shir chadash ki niflat asa Hoshia lo yemino Uzrahu akadsho Ayadio Adonai Yeshuato Lenei hagoyim gilatikato Zacha chasto ve'yemunato Leveit kalafsei haaretz. Eit Yeshuat Eloheinu hariyu l'Adonai kol haaretz b'tzchorenu v'zamiru zamru l'Adonai b'chinar v'kol ezimara b'chatzot ran v'kol shofar hari l'bnei HaMelech Adonai Yiram hayam Omelo'ohu Tebele ve'yosh v'van Naharot imcha'u chav Yachad darim yeraneinu lifnei Adonai kiva Lishbot haaretz Yishbot Tebele b'tzedek Ve'yamim ve'meisharim Yayadadadadai Yayadadai Yayadadadadadai Yayadadadadadai Yayadadai Yayadadadadai Adonai Malachim Yoshev Kuvim Tanut Haaretz Levitzim Gadol Baramhu Ala Kol Ha'amim Yadushim Chonei HaKadosh. Page 317. Ve'yamudai daber aleihem Shameru edotav V'chol kanatan lamo Adonai Eloheinu Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Mizmor leDavid. Please rise. Havol Adonai b'nei Elim Havol Adonai kavodos Havol Adonai kavod shemo Ishtachavu l'Adonai b'hadrat kodesh Kol Adonai alamayim el kavod hirim Adonai alamayim rahabim Kol Adonai b'hakoach Kol Adonai b'hada Kol Adonai shover arazim v'yishaber Adonai et arzei halavanon v'yakidem kamo hegel Lebanon v'Sirion kamo v'nera'imim Kol Adonai chotev lahavot ish Kol Adonai yachid midbar Yachid Adonai midbar kadesh Kol Adonai yacholel ayalot Vayechesov ya'arot v'heyacholot Kula omer kavod Adonai lamabol Vayeshev Adonai melech le'olam Adonai yoz le'amo yitein Adonai yavarech et amo v'shalom. Page 319, the Lachadodi. Lechadodi likrat kala penei Shabbat lekabela Shama v'zachor v'di'evorechad ishmiyamno elam yuchad Adonai echad Oshemo echad l'shemo letiferet v'lihitila lechadodi likrat kala penei Shabbat lekabela likrat Shabbat lecho v'necha ki mekar haber סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת מקבלה מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה קומיצאי מתוך וחרב לך שבט בימי קבחה והוא יחמור עלייך חמלה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה התנערי מיפה קומי לבשי בגדי תפארת חמי על יד בן ישי בית הלחמי קרבה אל נפשי גאלה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה התעוררי כי יברך קומי אורי ישיב דברי כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה לא תבושי ולא תקלמי מה תשתוכחי ומה התמי בו יחפשו עניי עמי ונבנתה עירתי לה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה והיו למשיסה שעשייך ורחקו כל מבלייך יסיס עלייך אלוהייך כמזוז חתנה לכלה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה ימין ושמאל תפרוצי ואת אדוני תריצי על יד איש בן פרצי ונשמחה ונגילה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה. Please rise, face the entrance to the room where you are. בואי בשלום עטרת בעלה גם בשמחה ובצהלה תוך אמוני ים סגולה בואי חלה לכדודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה. Please be seated. We continue on page 325 with the Psalm 92. This is the psalm that officially welcomes in Shabbat, certainly for the men. For the women, lighting candles is what ushers in the Shabbat for them. And the recitation of Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat is what does it for the men. We continue on page 325. Mizmor Shir, Shir Leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir, Shir Leyom HaShabbat. Tov lehodot l'Adonai lezamer l'shimcha elyon, להגיד בבוקר חסדך. צדיק אתה מה יפרק ירש בלבנון יזכה שטוב עולים בבית אדוני בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו. נבון בסביבות שיינים רננים יהיו להגיד ki yashar Adonai Tzuri v'lo avela tabo. Bottom of page 325. Adonai malach geyut lavesh Adonai osit azar mikol ha'otamayim rabim adirim mishbereyom adir b'marom Adonai eyedot echanem numeyod leveit chana avakodesh Adonai liorech yamim. For those in mourning or observing yard site, mourners Kaddish, page 327. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabah bi'alama divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayei chon v'yomei chon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael b'gala u'vizman kari v'meru amen. Yehei shmei rabah v'barach li'olam al me'amaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitala l'shemei d'kudsha b'richu le'eyela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran b'yama v'meru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru amen. And at this time we turn to page 335, the last paragraph of the Mariv service. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro mariv aravim b'chochma. Omahavi yom omei v'layela umavtir b'nim v'lahayel Adonai tzvaot shemo elachai v'kayom Tamidim lachaleinu le'olam va'ed baruch atah Adonai ha'mahariv arabim ahavat olam Beit Yisrael amcha ahavta. Ki hema chayeinu v'yorech yameinu uvahem negeh yomam v'layla v'yavadcha al tasi mimenu eliyahu elamim baruch atah Adonai ohev Yisrael. Let's join together, page 337. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. V'yahavatayit Adonai Elohecha b'chol avacha v'chol nafshecha v'chol ma'odecha v'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibaretabam בשבתך ובעשיך בלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך וקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בניניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך והיה אם שמו ויאספת דגניך ותירושך ויצהריך למען יבוא ימיכם וימי בניכם על האדמה ויאמר אדוני משה מדבר בני למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Page 341. ואמונה כזאת וקיים עלינו. המשלים גמול לכל אויבי נפשנו העושה גדול עליהם חקר. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה יאמרו לכולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדע בקודש נהר התהילות העושה יפה למלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה זלי אנו ויאמרו אדוני מלך לעולם ועד ונאמר כי פדן יעקב וגולו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום. ושמוצאתנו ואוהנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך ברוך אתה אדוני הפורי סוכה שלום הללויה כלמו ישראל ויעל ירושלים. Please rise as we turn to page 345 of Shaare. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית העולם. silent Amidah is found on page 347 in your Sidurim. Melech Hashem Hashem Elokim, אתה גיבור לעולם, אתה קדש ושמך קדש וקדושים בכל יום יום. בחיים כסות בספסח ושם בניס כסות. כי ששת ימים עשה וצא עושי לא רצה לתום אליו בעודת. צור חיינו מדוין ישנו התאהו לדבר. שים שלום טובה וברכה חיים חיים וחסד ורחם עלינו כל ישראל. הביאו פניך נתת. Yes. When you're finished with your silent devotion, please join us on page 359. ויחולו השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם ויחלים יום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה וישפוט ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי ויקדשו אותו כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. And at this time we take hold of our Kiddush cups. If you have one handy, filled them with wine, please join with me, page 363. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodesho b'ahava u'b'ratzon hinechi lanu zikaron l'maseh v'reishit ki hu yom techilah l'mikra v'kodesh zecher l'yetziat Mitzrayim ki vanu avacharta v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodeshecha ba'ahava u'b'ratzon hinechalatanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Page 365, Aleinu. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגאר עלינו ככל עמונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומונים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים להיות איתנו. הוא אלוהינו אינו אמת מלכנו אפת זולתו ככתוב בתורתו. כי לך תכרע כל ברך, תשוב וכל השם פניך. ככתוב בתורתך ונעים לך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו For those in mourning or observing yard site, mourners Kaddish, Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemi rabba, v'yalma divarach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'gala u'vizman kariv v'meru amen. Yehi shmi rabba mevarach li'olam u'me'omaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei, v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitala shemei dekutsha b'recho, le'eila min kol birchata v'shirata, toshbachata v'nechemata damiran b'yama v'meru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shamaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru amen. Ose shalom bimramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru. Amen. Please be seated for just a few moments. I won't keep you long. Just a few thoughts about this Shabbat, because this evening we are marking a transition from Purim to Shabbat. Shabbat this week, however, is also a Purim in a way. It's Shushan Purim, the day Purim is celebrated in Jerusalem and in other cities that were walled during the days of Joshua. A day later than the rest of the world in those cities is Purim celebrated. This year and every year, when Purim falls on Friday, people in Jerusalem actually have a 3-day-long Purim celebration known as Purim Meshulash, with some of the mitzvot that are associated with Purim being done on Friday, some being done on Shabbat, which is actually Purim for Jerusalemites, because it's Shushan Purim, because Jerusalem is a walled city, and some of the mitzvot being done on Sunday, because there are things we won't do or can't do on Shabbat. Now, in addition to there being different days when Purim is celebrated, there are some Purims that are celebrated at different times of the year. Now, those of you who were on our services each weekday last week will know that I explained this to you and I gave you some of the different types of Purim that exist. Now, the story of Purim is a story of the Jews being saved from disaster. Having been saved from a disaster, we celebrate in very traditional Jewish ways, especially having a festive meal. We're always looking for a reason to eat, so what better way than at every celebration? Now, from the holiday of Purim, we learn that if you have been saved from a disaster, you can, and some people would say you should, mark the occasion with a personal holiday, thanking God for the miracle of your deliverance. Now, there are a number of communities and individuals who have celebrated what we call a mini Purim, a personal Purim, one that reflects some form of deliverance of their own. It's a holiday on the anniversary of being redeemed from disaster. And one of the most famous, as I told the Minyan on Monday, is the famous Frankfurter Purim, or more commonly known as the Purim of Vince, which was celebrated first in 1616. Now, the story has an arc similar to our more familial Purim story with Haman. In this case, there was an evil man in Germany, Vince Fettmilch, whose nickname was Vince, who even styled himself as the new Haman. And he led a group of the city's guilds to petition the new emperor for lower taxes and fewer Jews in the city. Now, the emperor ignored their request, and Feldmilch led an attack on the Jewish quarter, fighting, burning, looting, killing. It was so bad that the Jews had to flee for their lives. Now, the emperor, when he heard what was going on, was not happy at all. He considered the Jews his personal property. And he had Fettmilch and 6 other leaders of the pogrom executed. And the Jews were welcomed back to Frankfurt. Since Fettmilch was executed in February, close to our original Purim time, and he even considered himself a new Haman, the Frankfurt community decided to commemorate the event with a special Purim. They even wrote a very long, poetic retelling of the story in Yiddish that they called the Megillat Vince. The Frankfurt community continued to celebrate Frankfurter Purim on the 20th of Adar for hundreds of years. Now, Rabbi Avram Danzig, a very well-known 19th century Lithuanian rabbi, included the concept of a personal Purim as halacha in his book, the Chaye Adam. Whoever has had a miracle occur to him, all the more so the inhabitants of a city that might have experienced such a miracle, can establish the day for themselves. And those who come after them, they should continue to celebrate that day as Purim. Now, Rabbi Danzig included a footnote with his own personal Purim story. And he writes as follows. In 1804, a gunpowder magazine accidentally exploded in the heart of Vilna. 31 people were recorded to have been killed in the courtyard where Rabbi Danzig lived. His own house collapsed, with 2 walls and a roof beam caving in. Yet none of his family lost their lives. And Rabbi Danzig instituted his family's own annual mini Purim on the 16th of Nisan, corresponding to the date that they were saved. And Rabbi Danzig called it the Pulver Purim, in other words, the gunpowder Purim. People still do this to this day. I have a close colleague, Rabbi Barry Lev, and he was living in Iran, and it happened to be, it was just at the time during the revolution of 1978-79. He was working as a technical instructor, and he celebrates February 16, the anniversary of his evacuation from Iran, as a personal Purim. And he does so by eating Persian food and retelling his story. Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, in many ways is another communal Purim for the people of Israel that was so important it became a holiday of its own. Not well known, but the story even has an Esther-like character. Now in the Purim story, in our Purim story, when it came time to approach the king to help save the people, we're told that Esther was nervous. You don't just show up at the king's chambers. That would get you executed if you didn't have an invitation. You were supposed to wait for the king to call on you. Now the king hadn't called on Esther for more than 30 days. And Esther was understandably nervous about approaching the king, but she had to do it. And she did. And the king indicated, as soon as he saw her, his delight and his acceptance of her visit by extending the royal scepter. And as you know from the book of Megillah, which we read on Thursday night, all was well. Now, in the end of Israel Independence Day story, one of the most important events was the United Nations vote to partition Palestine on November 29, 1947. But the United States State Department was opposed to it. They were afraid of the fallout of the Arab nations. And they advised at the time President Truman not to support the establishment of the State of Israel. Chaim Weizmann, who was the leader of the Zionist movement and future first president of Israel, was even denied a meeting with Truman. The Zionist leaders were feeling desperate. They didn't know what to do. When somebody remembered that Truman had a childhood friend named Eddie Jacobson. Now, Eddie Jacobson was a Jew whose family had moved from New York to Kansas City. And Eddie made a friend at school, a kid named Harry. And they became very close friends. And they even went into business together. They opened up a clothing store together. Unfortunately, the business wasn't so successful. They went mechula, but that's another issue. Eddie became a traveling salesman. And Harry, shall we say, made it a little bit higher and became the president of the United States of America. So the Zionist movement tracked down this Eddie and asked if he could get Truman to meet with Weizmann. Okay, Eddie said he'd try. And he called Harry and he said that he needed to see him. Truman's staff tried everything they could to block that meeting. But the president said, "This is my old buddy, this is my old friend Eddie, of course I have to see him." Well, when Eddie arrived, Harry told him, "You can talk to me about anything except for Israel." Eddie was a little flustered and he started crying. And Truman asked him, "Eddie, why are you crying?" And Eddie pointed to a statue in Harry's office and asked, "Who is that?" Truman replied, "That's my hero, Andrew Jackson." Eddie explained that he had a hero too. His hero was named Chaim Weizmann. Well, President Truman couldn't say no to his old friend, and that is how Chaim Weizmann got a meeting with President Truman, the President of the United States, and convinced him to vote in favor of the state of Israel. Now, the whole world is currently in a crisis state because obviously of the pandemic of the coronavirus. But perhaps, I was thinking about this morning, just perhaps the day that the virus is declared under control or perhaps even eradicated in Israel is the day that we should mark as a communal Purim, because it will certainly be a day worth celebrating. And with that, I wish you all Shabbat Shalom, and I hope that you'll join me and Gershon and Elizabeth tomorrow morning at our services at 10 a.m. We're going to conclude now with the Yigdal on page 371. יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח נמצא בעיני ישראל וציותו אחד בעין יחיד כייחודו נעלם וגם נצף מאחדותו אינו דבר תגוף ואינו גוף לא נערוך אליו קדושתו קדמו לכל דבר אשר נברא ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו הינו אדון עולם וכל נוצה יורה גדולתו ומלכותו שפן נבואתו נתנו אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו לא כל ישראל כמו שרוד נביא ומביט את אמונתו תורת אמת נתן לימוהב על יד נביאו למען ביתו לא יחליף האל ולא ימיר דתו לעולם ים לזולתו צופה ויודע סתרנו מביט לסוף דבר וקדמתו גומר לאיש חסד כמפעלו נותן לרשע רק כרישתו ישלח לקיץ ימים משיחנו לפתור בחגי קיץ ישועתו. Together, מתים יחיה ברוך חסדו ברוך הדיין לשם תהילתו מתים יחיה ברוך חסדו ברוך הדיין לשם תהילתו. Shabbat Shalom.